Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, if you're looking for which healer you'd like to main for the War Within, let me talk to you about one of my favorites in Holy Priest. The spec has gotten a couple of changes since Dragonflight, and it looks to be better than ever going into the War Within. So if you're brand new to the spec, well, Holy Priest is all about the Holy Words. On the one hand, you have Holy Word Serenity, which is a massive single target heal. On the other, you have Sanctify, which is a ground targeted AoE heal, which is fantastic when players are stacked. You also have a damage Holy Word in Chastise, which can deal quite a large amount of damage, or also make it possible for you to deal even more. Now, these three Holy Words all have 1 minute cooldowns, and with the Miracle Worker talent that was added in Dragonflight, you can hold 2 charges of Serenity and Sanctify. Now, these cooldowns are then reduced by the Serendipity passive, where casting synergistic abilities are reducing those cooldowns for your Holy Words further. On the one hand, for Serenity, your single target Holy Word, Flash Heal, even Prayer of Mending, can be talented to reduce the cooldown of Serenity. Likewise for Sanctify, Prayer of Healing, and, if talented, Circle of Healing are returning Sanctify's cooldown. On the Chastise side, your damage abilities in Holy Nova, Holy Fire, and Smite are giving you more cast of Chastise. So while you have large, powerful Holy Words with large cooldowns, you can return them very quickly by casting those synergistic spells. It has a very straightforward healing profile, where in a dungeon environment, it's mostly focused on kind of like whack-a-mole, single target healing to blast lots of output into your allies, and when stacked, you can make good use out of Sanctify. In a raiding environment, you are usually focusing on returning more Sanctifies through good timing and efficient timing, I should say, of your Prayer of Healing casts. They deal insanely large amounts of damage, especially in a dungeon environment where you can use your Chastise and talent into it to give you free Holy Fires, and you can have talents like Burning Vehemence, which cause your Holy Fire to cleave enemies, dealing absurd amounts of damage, and that will only continue in the War Within, as it's definitely a top 3 damage healer for dungeons. When playing Holy Priest in a dungeon environment, you want to make sure you're keeping your Prayer of Mending ability on cooldown at all times, as it will go onto a player and then bounce whenever they take damage, triggering an efficient heal. You're usually, like I mentioned, focusing on your single target healing, this time with Lightweaver, where you are casting a flash heal, which then buffs your next cast of heal, which produces some really good synergies with your incoming tier set bonus, allowing you to weave between flash heals and heals to spot heal allies, provide triage, do excellent tank healing, and, of course, to give you more Serenities. In a raiding environment, you're also making good use out of that Prayer of Mending ability once again, and this time it also can give you more stacks of a talent called Answered Prayers. What Answered Prayers does is it helps give you Apotheosis, which is one of the cooldowns we're going to talk about in a second. This cooldown is epic because it helps return your Holy Words to you more rapidly, and so when you play in a raid environment, you can cast your Circle of Healing, which then gives you a buff called Prayer Circle, to then cast very efficient and fast Prayer of Healings to really quickly bring back the cooldown of Sanctify, to then feed huge amounts of healing, especially when players are going to be stacked. It also has good synergy with another of our cooldowns, one of the most important really in Holy Word Salvation. Now, this is a 12-minute cooldown, a massive cooldown, but is actually reduced by casting more Holy Words. And so the more Holy Words you're casting in a raiding environment, the lower that the cooldown is going to be brought, and it should be around 5.5 minutes or so. It could be getting a little bit less, as we'll discuss some synergies with our hero talents, but placing Renew onto all of your allies, a couple stacks of Prayer of Mending, and a heal on top of it that's triggering our Mastery and Echo of Light, which is another healing over time effect, provides some massive output, and it is an incredibly satisfying cooldown to use. Our other major raid CD that you might be familiar with is Divine Hymn, which of course is our channeled raid cooldown that you need to be standing still for about 5-ish seconds to channel to its completion, and it's also, of course, putting out that stacking healing increase onto your allies. They did buff him for a 5-man environment, but it's still kind of mediocre, so it's going to stay raid focused for now. Apotheosis is the cooldown we mentioned previously, and while it's a choice node with Holy Word Salvation, you could still get a proc effect out of it by using the talent Answered Prayers. Usually you talent into Apotheosis in a dungeon environment where you can use it really flexibly for damage or for healing. Since it increases the regen rate of your holy words for those specific casts, having, let's say, 6 seconds of cooldown reduction when you cast a flash heal then becomes 18 seconds. And it's only going to be higher with synergistic talents and tier set bonuses, making Apotheosis an amazing cooldown to feed you more holy words. As I mentioned before, you can use this for healing or damage because those Chastise casts can then feed you into more Holy Fires, and if you talent into things like Voice of Harmony, you can get more Holy Fire casts, which give you more Chastise, which gives you more Holy Fire casts, and you can very quickly see why the spec does so much damage in a dungeon environment. Last cooldown I want to talk about is Divine Word, which is a really cool ability in that it empowers your next holy word, making it stronger, and then gives you a buff that is sort of synergizing along with what your goal is. If you use it on Serenity, for example, well, then your flash heals and your single target heals are costing less, healing more. If you're using it on Sanctify, it's placing a ground effect at that location where you cast the Sanctify, which is just providing really huge healing over time. They actually messed with the animation of this in TW, so it's actually very hard to see the ground effect, but just trust me, it's there. Chastise, when you use it with Divine Word, is an epic damage buff, which further feeds into the high damage that Holy Priest deals, which is fantastic. Holy Priest notably has some of the weaker defensives in the game, but while it does not have as strong of defensives, it makes up for them with extremely high uptime. The first one I want to talk about is Fade, which is not only a defensive, but also a bit of utility as well, because it reduces your damage taken with some of the synergistic talents in your class tree, which you always are taking, but it also reduces the radius that enemies are going to aggro to you, which means that you can use Fade instead of an invisibility pot when you're in a dungeon environment, as long as you're not walking through the mobs. It reduces the radius and allows you to get closer to enemies without them aggroing you, but you can't just walk right through an enemy or something like that. Give them as much space as you can, but it does a fantastic job of getting around mobs and being a good defensive in the process. Desperate Prayer increases your stamina. You can do it by about 40% if you take all the synergistic talents, allowing you to sort of survive larger hits. And so you're always trying to use this preemptively before the big damage happens. But if you've already taken some hits, it also heals you for the same amount that your health is increased, so that you are having the largest health pool possible, really, to survive the damage. You can also cast Flash Heal on yourself or use the Binding Heal talent so that whenever you cast Flash Heal on somebody else, you're still gaining the effect of Protective Light, again, giving you near permanent damage reduction, or at least giving it to you on demand whenever you might need it. On the utility side, the number one utility that everybody likes to talk about is Power Infusion. Being able to grant somebody else in your party large amounts of haste on a 2-minute cooldown is insanely valuable, and it's been historically a massive reason why people like to bring priests into their dungeons. Every once in a while, there's always going to be a chart of who gains the most damage every season from PI, and people will find out, and people will argue over it. The best way to find out who wants PI is always to ask, because then the DPS are going to come around with their charts and all their knowledge as all of who is going to benefit the most. Guardian Spirit is our cheat death. It's also a very low cooldown if you're taking some of the synergistic talents, allowing it to be a 1-minute cooldown. It massively increases the healing taken that the ally who receives it gets, and it allows them to survive any sort of one-shots or any sort of deaths that they might have, as long as the hit is not twice their maximum HP. There's some boss mechanics that deal like massive damage is what they call it, and those are going to kill you through Guardian Spirit. So there's a lot that Guardian Spirit can save you from, but you can't just straight up solo mechanics. The other utility cooldown I want to talk about is Symbol of Hope, which is an excellent cooldown. It got a bit nerfed in Dragonflight, but it reduces the cooldown of your allies' defensives by 30 seconds. And since we're in this bursty damage environment, getting half off of most of the cooldowns for your allies can help out a ton, and it'll reduce 1 cooldown per spec. I have a whole chart of it. It's all in my Wowhead guides, and I think we can have a picture of it here as well. It shows all of the cooldowns for everybody, but the majority of the cooldowns are around a minute or a minute and a half, and so taking off half or a third of the cooldown can make it that much easier for your allies to use their defensives, and at worst, you can time it for your own cooldown in Desperate Prayer to make sure that you have that cooldown back faster to survive the next incoming hits. Holy Priest hasn't changed massively going into the War Within, We are going to talk about the hero talents in just a second, but from the spec tree perspective, they made it so that some talents are now 1-pointers instead of 2-pointers. Some things like Trail of Light, for example, were really nice to be able to have as just a 1-pointer. They did buff Lightweaver, which is going to lock it in as a Mythic Plus option. And with that extra point that you have from Trail of Light, I've been putting it into Censure, which is making it easier to have Chastise be really just a better crowd control ability, making it a stun. And since you're getting so many Chastises, then since you're casting lots of Holy Fires in dungeons, you really get just better effectiveness out of using that stun. We also did get like a range increase on our class tree, which is not that great. Might have some niche value or something, might be used in a raid or something along those lines, but it's okay. Now let's talk about the hero talents. Holy Priest has some banger hero talents, and we're going to start it off with Archon. This one is very straightforward and very simple to use in that it is requiring you to talent into Halo, and it's actually causing it to cast multiple times. And so when you cast your Halo, it's now a 1-minute cooldown. Not only is it going to spread out and heal all of your allies and do even more healing than it has done in the past few expansions, but then it's going to contract, come back to you, heal allies, damage enemies, and then expand a few more times, further blasting even more healing. Every ally that is actually healed by your Halo is also taking more healing for a few seconds afterwards. It's also empowering each of your major cooldowns in both Salvation and in Apotheosis to make you do more healing while Apotheosis is active, or for a few seconds after you cast Salvation, making your powerful raid CDs feel even more powerful on top of it. And you get bonus stamina, and you get bonus power infusion for yourself. That last one's a little bit meh, but it's a very straightforward hero talent to be able to operate. You pretty much just cast Halo when you need to. You're getting more Surge of Light procs, which is giving you more powerful flash heals. So even when you're blasting AoE healing, you can still get some good spot healing along the way, which is feeding into more Holy Word generation for Serenity. Overall, the spec does a ton of healing in a raid environment in particular, and this is a solid cooldown to have in a dungeon environment, since thankfully your Halo does not pull any monsters anymore, although in beta it was bugged for like a little while pulling extra stuff. While I love Archon, Oracle Priest has really grown on me for Holy. If you haven't checked it out already, I'd highly recommend that you do so. It started off really rough, replacing Power Infusion, but now it is a personal only buff. There are 3 different buffs that you are applying only to yourself, and then a 4th buff, and again on these 1-minute cooldowns, then is going to have all 3 of the buffs together for that 15-20 second period. The first buff that you get is called Insight, and so when you talent into Fatebender, which makes the abilities all feel more powerful, it's about 10 seconds of cooldown reduction that you get to your next 3 ability casts. What's a 10-second cooldown that Holy Priest has and loves? Well, it's Prayer of Mending. And with it, you can just spam a ton of Prayer of Mendings very rapidly, and your Prayer of Mending casts with Oracle are also casting free Power Word shields, which add up to quite a bit of healing, like 4 or 5% of my overall healing in dungeons. Then, you can use those Prayer of Mending stacks that are building onto your allies, talent into something like Answered Prayers, which is then able to proc Apotheosis, and you have a faster and just more smooth Holy Word regen while you're dealing with steady damage. You can also then use Insight for Holy Fire, since Holy Fire also has about a 10-second cooldown, and you can spam out even more Holy Fires if you want to deal really huge amounts of damage. But it gets better. The second buff that you have is Piety, which is increasing your healing and redirecting overhealing that you've done to nearby allies. The great thing about this, when talented into Fatebender, is that the overheal protection is 98%. This might get nerfed, we'll see, but you can pair this buffed up Piety with the other talent on the tree called Prophet's Will, which increases your flash heal, and your Serenity healing that you do to yourself. And so if you're redirecting 98% of your overhealing, and all of the spells you cast in a dungeon environment, which are mostly single target, are doing 30% more healing to you, well, you can just mash healing into yourself like crazy, and it's actually more efficient to do that than healing your allies, allowing you to every 2 minutes blast huge healing into yourself with no cap, and then be able to spread huge burst healing to everybody around you. It is the perfect solution to Holy Priest's more single target focused nature, because you never really had a good way to like blast big AoE healing. And now with Piety, you actually can. It's so satisfying to be able to play with. It does huge amounts of healing, and it is an epic cooldown when used properly. The third cooldown is also no slouch. It is called Solace, and it applies a massive absorb. On beta, it's about half of your health, and it absorbs like 2.5 million or so. And it also grants 20-25% damage reduction for that 15-second period, meaning you have a huge absorb and huge damage reduction all together, which helps massively for Holy Priest, as their usual defensive in Guardian Spirit doesn't provide any damage reduction whatsoever. So you can use it on the tank when you need to, you can use it on yourself or another ally, and you pretty much just like mark that target and they are just safe. And again, 1 minute later, you get the Clairvoyance buff, which gives you Insight, Piety, and Solace all together in one, allowing you to just blast huge amounts of healing, get more Prayer of Mendings out, more Holy Fires out. You feel incredibly powerful when Oracle is used properly. While it's harder to utilize than something like Archon, it actually feels really rewarding every single time that you use it. And so I love the changes that they've made to Oracle, and would highly recommend you give it a try for yourself. So how is Holy Priest going to perform in a dungeon environment with the world of tier lists and everything going on all over the place? Well, I actually think that Holy Priest is going to perform very well. And while I don't think it's going to be the highest level like meta spec that you're able to bring to the table, I think that's mainly due to like the lack of kick and crowd control, which, you know, unfortunately because of PvP, Blizzard doesn't seem to be keen to give us those kind of things. But when it comes to just healing the boss fights and healing the difficult trash packs, Holy Priest does a tremendous job of responding to both expected damage and unexpected damage, allowing you to always have some kind of output to just blast healing and get through any of those difficult situations that you have. It plays very well with its mana. You might have to drink a little bit here and there, but that's not too different than most of the healers that we've been playing on beta lately. There was some bugs early on in beta that were just like killing your mana bar, but they've since fixed those bugs and fixed those issues, making it so the spec plays very efficiently. And on the most grueling of boss fights that I've had, I start running out of mana near the end, but when you have a cooldown like Apotheosis, which you can both proc with Answered Prayers and activate by just talenting into the cooldown, you have a lot of moments where you can have high mana efficiency, since Apotheosis makes your holy words free. There's also a lot of surge procs that you're able to get for free flash heal casts, and there's a lot of ways that the spec can sort of just dig itself out of problems. And that, I think, is incredibly valuable in a dungeon environment. And with all the spot healing required, where you need lots of single target healing on a variety of boss fights and trash pulls. Some trash pulls are just laser focusing one person and you have to blast healing into them. That's Holy Priest's bread and butter. Oracle really only makes that better, and it even just kind of increases your own survivability and the survivability of the group with the various buffs you're able to toss out, making it the best option for Holy Priest in a Mythic Plus environment going forward. While I don't expect it to be topping anybody's M+ tier lists, I think most people are going to really underrate how Holy Priest is, and I personally love how it plays, I love how it operates, and I think it's going to be performing well above most people's expectations. In a raid environment, Holy Priest just absolutely blasts, and that's only going to continue. You basically have two good builds right now, where you could spec into one that's very active and more challenging by taking talents like Epiphany or Divine Word, where the placement of your Sanctify fields matter a lot, gaming your Holy Word casts for Prayer of Mending resets to feed more Answered Prayers, to give you more Holy Words, to give you more Holy Word Salvation cooldown reduction. There's a lot, but it does feel rewarding and high performing. On the other hand, you could play a very passive playstyle by leveraging some talents like Lightwell instead of Divine Word, and really just solidly generating Holy Words when you can, letting Lightwell automatically do some healing. It seemed to be pretty good, but at the moment, I don't think it's as good as a well-placed Divine Word that actually is getting good value. And so the nice side of it is that the spec just has really balanced talents, especially in a raid environment where you can kind of flex into play styles if there's more movement, or if you don't want to have as active of a playstyle where you have to be monitoring some of your buffs more rapidly or more acutely. And so the spec is really excellent to bring in a new player while also having an increased skill ceiling than it had for most of Dragonflight. And with the hero talents, both of them feel rewarding to play, fun to play, and the extra challenge out of Oracle actually feels rewarding for that work that you put into it. So in total, if you're looking for a ranged healer that's easy to get into, but also has some excellent skill expression, both in raids and in Mythic Plus, Holy Priest might just be for you. It's certainly going into the expansion as one of my favorites, and while I know that some people are always going to underrate it, I think that Holy Priest actually plays much better than it had throughout all of Dragonflight. There were multiple seasons where the spec was actually doing quite well, especially things like Season 3, but I think that going into the War Within is going to be even better than before, both for a raid environment and a Mythic Plus environment. It is insanely fun to play, and I highly recommend you guys give it a try. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and huge thank you to our patrons for making all of this content possible. If you'd like to support the channel further, check us out in the description down below. Let me know if you have any questions about Holy Priest or any other specs going into the War Within. Appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you all next time.